Thank you, Secretary General Rodney, and welcome and good morning to everyone to this, our fifth Caribbean Internet Public Policy Forum. As you heard, this is a continuation of an ongoing dialogue regionally concerning the evolving implications of digital transformation, technology advance on public policy development. And it is hoped as we continue into this year's edition that beyond the conversations, this gathering allows us all to take stock of the incredible work that is being done across the region. The agenda today has been very focused on identifying activities and initiatives from across the region by those in the trenches so that we can get a sense of some of the real issues and priorities that are currently facing policymakers regionally. This collaboration, as Kevin Swift has indicated, has grown to now include LACNIC as one of the collaborators alongside the CTU, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers, as we seek to join forces and increase forces as it relates to creating a holistic perspective on exactly what are the levers required for really optimizing or getting the most out of our investments nationally and regionally in digital transformation. And that's what I want to look at in my presentation this morning. It's titled Investing in Caribbean Digital Transformation. And I want to pull together some of the thoughts and perspectives that have been gleaned from looking at developments across the region. And I wanted to share what I hope will be some actionable takeaways that you can put into policymaking considerations going forward. The outline of it is relatively simple. We're going to take a look at some of an inside look at Caribbean ICT innovation, really, and the anatomy of innovation as we are seeing it emerging in the Caribbean. Some of these thoughts are not exactly Googleable, and I've come across several policymakers who try to find answers for Caribbean challenges by looking online, and most of the online content, of course, is referring to jurisdictions and scenarios that are not always compatible with the challenges and issues being faced in the region. So we want to look at the innovation ecosystems that are evolving, and then tackle some requirements for digital transformation. But first, let's consider what is digital transformation. And I wanted to put before you a definition that goes a bit beyond the standard using technology to evolve and advance economic and social development goals. And I want to add this dimension that digital transformation refers to the integration of technology into areas of business and corporate life, but it is best understood when that integration is attached to some well-defined purpose. Digital transformation seeks to alter fundamental or bring fundamental and radical change to how we operate and how we deliver value. As we proceed this morning, you'll be hearing from different practitioners looking at specific areas of interest and specific areas of opportunity to which they are applying available or innovative information and communication technology. But there's another dimension to transformation that we want to consider, and that is it always, wherever it is, in whatever part of the world, it always involves some kind of cultural change or paradigm shift. Terms that we've been hearing for decades around anything related to technology, really, as it forces or triggers organizations to break from or upend the status quo and to continually challenge it. Yesterday's innovation does not guarantee tomorrow's innovation. In fact, left unchanged, it will simply lead to another legacy system or another status quo that itself needs to be ultimately disrupted. So why does this matter for the Caribbean? What are we going after? Well, it matters because we are in a context where in fora like these, we have been discussing for some time now, the need for the region to increase its competitiveness, to improve its digital and physical security mechanisms and frameworks, particularly in the face of increasing threats, whether they're cyber security related threats or they're threats related to traditional issues such as drug and human trafficking. Security is a fundamental priority for the region. And of course, you have the sustainability and resilience component as a region with small island states, small territories, small economies, small populations, and vulnerable to shocks, internal and external, at a level that is different from larger economies and larger societies. And so innovation in this context for us allows for these issues of competitiveness, security, sustainability, and resilience to be tackled within the context of our size and scale. But there are several myths around this issue of size and scale that we also have to wrestle with whenever we consider issues of digital transformation or digital innovation. And part of what moving toward the most effective use of the technology for transformation requires is breaking this myth of smallness. And we've seen and heard of reports from various bodies and institutions that reflect a reality, and that is that in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, firms that begin or initiatives that begin small tend to stay small. And there have been all sorts of theories around this chronic lack of innovation in the region and its impact on stifling business growth and competitivity. The region needs to establish an environment which enables entrepreneurs. This is a well-known and well-understood fact. The region needs to establish an environment which allows our entrepreneurs to emerge, to compete, and to innovate. And that ultimately is what we are seeking to do. But very often that conversation about sparking or spurring innovation is connected to what is the public policy required to facilitate it. And how can innovators find themselves in environments where the institutions themselves aren't impediments to growth, competitiveness, and innovation that we're seeking. And we know that there are examples that demonstrate that it is possible for small ideas and small firms and small business opportunities to grow into massive global enterprises. We have the Sandals, the Angosturas, the SM Jalils, Grace Kennedys, and others of this world that are making their mark on an international scale. So it is possible, but it requires a set of components to be in place if we are to really see these successes. And you'll notice from the list I have on screen that the big thing that it requires isn't just finance. It's that driving philosophy that says we can do great things on a global scale. It's that mentality that says we are capable of inventing and creating and innovating. But it's also the frameworks, the legislation, the policy, the regulation that support and create even, stable, equitable markets and environments for businesses and business ideas to thrive, for creativity to flourish. And it is the enabling, the human resource enabling components that allow for persons to understand how to leverage and take full advantage of systems, not just how to have good ideas, but how to build, for example, secure technology solutions, how to create businesses that effectively manage finances and negotiate complex legal environments of intellectual property protection and creation and so on. And of course, how to engage with the environments that we're in to ensure that the solutions fundamentally solve needs that are real and that are able to sustain the kind of investment that it takes to grow and to grow and to grow. And of course, the anatomy of innovation ecosystems also invariably involves leadership. Leadership that can push against the tide and that can break the barriers that stand in the way. Using indigenous capacity, but also leveraging on global relationships and networks and partnerships. Wherever we look across the region, we see elements of these blocks or these pillars being in place when you have dimensions of success as it relates to innovation and digital transformation. And if you ask the innovators and if you ask those in the fields, whether they're in the private sector or the public sector, there are some questions that are always asked when trying to shape or define solutions. What specific steps do we need to take to get this problem solved or this challenge overcome? What new roles are we looking at when we're trying to build out teams and trying to build out systems and organizations? A fundamental question is also, how do we perceive our future? Where are we going toward? What's this goal or target or end state that represents an achievable and desirable outcome? What's the strategy to get there? What's the cost? And is it really worth it? To proceed without asking these questions in any endeavor would be to fundamentally handicap the successability or the success of that endeavor. And so I'm putting these in front of us, not just as policymakers, but as persons who are involved in shaping an environment at a national or regional level, as we consider what transformation ultimately requires. These questions need answers. These questions have to be interrogated. These questions have to be brought to mind whenever one considers trying to do something new and trying to make sure that that new thing is a sustainable thing. Ultimately, we have to look at the digital economy, digital transformation, digital innovation as an ecosystem that involves the people and goes all the way to the leadership, the creation of innovation and innovators and innovation mindsets, the development of human and physical networks, and of course, the policy, regulation, and the capacity to enforce it in a timely manner. And at the center of it all, the content, the applications and services that represent the interface point between an idea and its impact on our societies. So when you look at this as an ecosystem, you realize for the region to really advance, and you'll hear it in the roundtable discussion to follow, for the region to really advance, we have to confront some basic fundamental truths. The tides alone will not take us to the levels of innovation, the levels of transformation, the levels of resilience, the levels of security that we are trying to achieve. Specific deliberate action is always required. People have to be educated and equipped and empowered. Policy and laws have to be enabled, enacted, activated. And of course, there has to be this persistence component where people have the confidence, companies, organizations, and institutions have the confidence, boldness, and faith to press forward. This is just a fact of any innovation ecosystem. People have to be yoked to enabling policy, and there has to be a dimension of persistence that presses through until the status quo evolves or changes into something more relevant and more appropriate. From what I have seen and what we have heard in fora organized by CTU, organized by ARIN, organized by LACNIC across the region, the opportunities abound. They are there. There is no shortage of ideas, no constraint of talent potential. We absolutely have no shortage of issues to be addressed or needs to be met. There's also, when you look at the amount of resource that is passing through the region, no shortage of finance. The question is, how is it directed? How is it appropriated? How is it managed? How is it invested? And so when we want to look at the issue of transformation, it is against this backdrop, the backdrop of an ecosystem that requires multiple parts to work in sync, whether in the public sector or the private sector. It is against the backdrop of a talent pool and a creativity quotient that allows us to legitimately tackle real issues and legitimately consider the possibility of real solutions that are sustainable, that we recognize that the region is actually in a good place to realize and see some of these opportunities that exist in the digital era. I want to switch gears a bit at this point and just take a quick look at some of the stories that we'll be delving into today and remind us of this, of the reality of this fact that we have the capacity and the talent and the innovators to transform the status quo in several industries and several sectors. Typically, when you think about tech titans and you think about the giants and the innovators, we think of the images that are projected to us from the north, the Zuckerbergs of this world and the Elon Musks of this world. But it's all relative. There are innovators right here and right at home. Some of them will be talking to us today. Some of them will be sharing with us over the course of this public policy forum. We have our own talent pool of persons who have for a long while been pressing to develop ideas that are global, pressing to develop solutions that are relevant to our needs. And I wanted to acknowledge the fact that this is not theory. For these individuals and for the countries and for the sectors that they touch, the impact is real. The promise has been translated into reality. And there is more work to be done. And any one of them will tell you that it is not easy. But the thing that keeps us all going is that it is absolutely worth it when we consider the future of our countries and the future of our region. And so I want to close with some perspectives that have been acquired. And I hope that this will give us some context heading into today's meeting. The culture that we define cradles the capacity that we want to generate within the region. The issue of talking often about the kind of Caribbean we want to see and the kind of development that we're hoping to see is a big part of inspiring and creating this sense of hopefulness and possibility at a regional level, but it also works, of course, at a national level. Voices need to be heard, voices that speak to the possibility that is afforded by the technology, not technology for technology's sake, but as an enabler of solutions to real problems. Context is key. One size does not fit all. Taking models from outside of the region and trying to shoehorn them into the region, we have enough data to confirm that this does not work. Policy, regulation, and development agendas must be tailored to indigenous needs. And in our states, we recognize as well that governments and academia play an outsized role in providing innovation infrastructure, but it is not an exclusive role. They can't do it by themselves, and we can't expect that all of the transformation potential will come from the public sector or from our academic institutions. The private sector has to be given a seat at the table. Our young people have to be given a seat at the table so that these ideas can inform public policy in a more relevant and timely manner. And then, of course, we can have our local focus, but always with global sight. Innovation at any level is best pursued within the context of scaling to meet global needs. We are part of the small islands developing state community, which is a large community, but we also recognize that there are conditions and scenarios within the region that actually equate very well to rural North America or rural Latin America or rural Europe. And so solutions developed with this in mind, with this global context in mind, can actually scale to service needs in equivalent markets globally. And then the last thing I want to point out as we bring this session to a close is that our stories need to be told. A big part of the momentum that is required to really take digital transformation in the region to the next level is the awareness of what is taking place. It's for that reason that we have chosen day one to focus on what's happening out there, who's doing what, where. These stories need to be reflected beyond this meeting at a much wider, more public level so that it is understood that things are happening. There is no jurisdiction in which nothing is happening or nothing is working. These are fallacies that need to be eroded and expunged by the light of truth of what is actually taking place. Who's doing what, where, becomes a fundamental question to be answered and to be declared at a regional level. So when we consider investing in digital transformation, these are some of the thoughts and some of the perspectives that I wanted to bring into today's meeting. We have voices coming to share with us later today from the OECS, from Trinidad and Tobago, from academia. And we're hoping that in listening to these voices, we can get an evolved perspective on what public policy mechanisms would enable or enhance the initiatives that are in place and allow them to truly expand and evolve to the extent that we can all benefit as a region. And with that, I'm going to thank you and send back over to our moderator, Mr. Nigel Cassimire.
Yes, thank you very much, Bevil, for that opening salvo. I think there's a lot that was enlightening in that. And I'd like to encourage the audience basically to post questions in the Q&A under the Q&A tab. And while I engage in it for a few minutes with Bevil in terms of what he would have said, and there might be opportunity as well, depending on how many questions come in, for persons to make interventions on the floor. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit more on, there is no shortage of finance. Yes, there is no shortage of finance. But one looks at, for example, certainly at the governmental level around the Caribbean, it seems that all the governments are struggling financially. And particularly in the smaller islands of the Caribbean, the government is often the largest employer and driver of the economy and so on. What is the perspective you're bringing to say there's no shortage of finance? And maybe you could expand that more to see how we could navigate through this.
Thanks, Nigel. I can qualify the statement, which would help understand why I made it, in saying that there is no shortage of finance available to the relative to the needs that we have in terms of supporting innovation locally. What there is, though, is a shortage of data that allows that finance to be appropriately allocated. And I can use the example of the Caribbean Agency for Justice Solutions, which is a recent and very near example to me, where we are seeing scenarios region-wide where the budgets make provision for courier services, they make provision for paper-based systems, recopying and all of those things. And in the jurisdictions where the technology has been applied to introduce electronic filing, budgets that amount to tens of thousands of US per month for paper copying and courier services get eliminated, but they don't come back to help invest in the solution, expanding the solution that will digitize other areas of the court.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at it from a budgetary allocation standpoint, the issue for me is if there is greater awareness as to the impact, the return on investment in digitizing certain processes, in investing in indigenous human resource capacity, for example, versus the more expensive importing of outside solutions. I'm not saying that there are no scenarios or there is no context in which external expertise or external solutions are relevant. But I am saying when you compare the numbers in different sectors in terms of what is invested in things that can be automated or things that can be digitized and existing long-standing budgetary allocations for manual, paper-based or intensely human-based processes, you can see a very clear case. So if we invested this amount, we can reduce this other amount and see more sustainable and long-term cost reductions. Right. But the economics of that is not sufficiently interrogated. The research and data in the impact of the investment in automation is typically not sufficiently done. And so the information that needs to get back to the policymakers or the budget allocators is just not there to convince it, to sufficiently convince that there is a benefit in spending X million on this to save X million by Y on something else. And that understanding, I think, is a real problem, not the simple and easy to conclude statement that we don't have money or we don't have enough money. I think the issue is more we're not allocating the money in an optimal way based on the need and based on the potential for savings that can come from it.
Yeah, I could certainly see that in terms of us allocating funds in a way that supports the digital transformation. And the reason why you're getting into digital transformation is really to re-engineer the processes to be more efficient. And often that doesn't take place and the potential savings are not seized and that money that you would have been saving that you could have allocated elsewhere for growth is not really.
Yeah, and there's another dimension that has been unfortunately a characteristic of digital transformation projects regionally, and that is underfunded projects that then fulfill the negative prophecy that, well, these things won't work. Mm-hmm. So to start off with underfunding a project, you constrain it in its capacity to be completed effectively and on time, and then use it as a justification for not further investing in technology. And again, the type of, one of the things that I remember us proposing at the last meeting that I think is going to be extremely important at a regional level is looking at these things across territories, looking at the investment, looking at the factors that make projects succeed and factors that make projects fail, and using it to critically examine what kinds of approaches and what kinds of refinements can be made in the pursuit of digital transformation projects going forward.
Okay, and the last thing you said was our stories need to be told. Who tells it, and how do we promote the telling of these stories and encouraging that it could be effectively told and understood and internalized, you know?
My response to that is it should be told by as many voices as possible from as many angles as possible. I spoke to a bank CEO recently who was describing the rollout of an e-payments solution, and he was saying that they spent $1 million on marketing. I looked at him and said, "Oh, that's interesting. That's a significant amount. What kind of traction did you have?" And his response was not enough. And part of why, and this was my retort to, part of why it wasn't enough was because it wasn't sufficient for the bank's marketing campaign to raise enough public awareness as to the benefit of digital wallets and mobile payments. It required the bank's partners, it required the government, it required civil society actors to also encourage persons to take advantage of these available mechanisms for accessing finance and dealing with transactions, even if unbanked. But that story is a complex story. That story goes beyond marketing a product. Yeah. It goes into changing long-standing cultural habits about financial management and transactions and payments. You cannot make that noise as one institution. And the same thing applies whether we look at government services or e-government, whether we look at some of the transformation taking place in the commerce or commercial sector. The kind of awareness that needs to be triggered cannot be done by any one actor. We can't point to say that the media is not covering the story. They have their own agenda and priorities that sell newspapers. We have podcasters emerging across the region tackling issues. We have new models for getting the word out. And it is easier for stories to be told, but we have to make sure that there is a seed awareness if we have to trigger this downstream kind of translation of what the opportunities are and what their requirements are for adoption.
Indeed. Thank you. We do have like three questions that came in from the audience, and there was another comment that you can take on board from Kevin Swift as well. But the first question that I'll go to is from Ernestine Theophile Lafont. And it's, in your opinion, what are the leadership concerns that may be impacting the forward movement in relevant policy and regulation that would suit our needs? You mentioned leadership, and I guess this question focuses on that.
Right, and it's an excellent question. What are the leadership concerns? It depends on which sector the leader is standing in. Mm-hmm. Politically, investment in digital transformation has to have an impact that can effectively lead to votes. Let's be blunt. There is a helpful confluence of triggering the kind of public happiness, if you will, that also leads to change that can go beyond administrations. But there's political calculus from a policymaking standpoint, the kind of leadership that would drive transformation, in my mind, is investing in the data-driven decision-making model. So actively pursuing mechanisms to understand the nature of markets. For those in the telecom sector, for example, that will be surveys and studies that show the impact of investment in infrastructure, access, devices, affordability, the utilization of technology in different areas by different groups, so that public policy could be informed in a way that shapes the development of competitive and robust markets. That would be a public policy leadership priority, ensuring that ultimately the public good is served, ensuring that ultimately markets are healthy and that there are practices that are in the interest of consumers and citizens. And for leaders in those areas to get to that place, the information has to speak to them. It cannot simply be anecdotal. It cannot simply be institutional. It has to sample or poll the region, the context or the locale where that policy is to have an impact. So that would be my response from a leadership standpoint, is making sure that leaders are informed, making sure that there is awareness, and making sure that there's a connection between investment and return that is tangible and that is actionable.
All right, thank you. Second question is from Reginald Chauvet.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, there's no real interest in digitizing services because it would reveal too much, and the data generated would be embarrassing and political suicide. He didn't actually ask a question, but he makes this comment, and I suppose you could comment on the comment.
I could comment on the comment because it is a true comment, one. And two, one thing that we realized, I spoke about gleaned perspectives, is that there is, in many cases, tremendous profit in inefficiency. Inefficiency allows one to hide corrupt acts. Inefficiencies allows one to make systems, whether they are public sector systems or even private sector systems, contort or distort into vehicles for unethical or inappropriate behavior. And so this is where, again, the leadership issue comes in. If we're trying to overcome these inefficiencies, and if we're trying to remove the opportunities for corruption and for unpredictability of service delivery, then the issue is not whether there is interest in digital services or not. The issue is who pushes, who triggers, who agitates for the removal of these kinds of barriers. The issue is not digitization. The issue is efficiency. The issue is service excellence. And many persons, or many more persons, have an interest in those things than have an interest in digitization as an abstract concept. And so again, you see how the themes connect and roll in among themselves. The stories have to be told. If you think about the kinds of murmurings around government service, online service delivery inefficiencies, or around the difficulties in dealing with financial institutions, do they trigger the kind of discourse that leads to transformation in public policy? Or do they trigger the kind of discourse that leads to a transformation or an evolution of institutional structures to address those known and perceived frustration points in service delivery? And to me, getting those things amplified to the point where it is impossible to ignore that there is a more efficient way becomes a big part of the driving of change.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'll go on to Deirdre Williams's question.
Mm-hmm.
Is anyone concerned about and monitoring the storage, security, and longevity of government archives? Or doesn't that matter anymore?
Well, I'll leave that one to you, Nigel. Yeah, it says yes.
I would say
an elaboration.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I think it's a relevant consideration. The question is, to what extent are governments prioritizing their digitization and so on? Storing, security, longevity, I think all of these things are of importance. We We're looking at cloud storage, for example, and backup storage for government information. There is concern about the data sovereignty, control of the data, and so on. But certainly there are advantages to be gained by utilizing the benefits of the cloud for restoration, for disaster recovery, and those sorts of applications. So I think there is concern, but it's really a question of, I guess, bringing the governments along. And from CTU's point of view, we are attempting to assist with that by providing appropriate advice, policy advice, and so on, and in particular related to cloud policy, as far as that's concerned. I have a question from a youth perspective, but so I think this would be a good time to highlight a comment from Kevin Swift. He is asking you, Bevil, if you could elaborate on meaningful inclusion of young people in digital policy and/or digital transformation. Could you elaborate on?
I can, and I think it connects to Nicholas's question as well, or a
Yes.
statement. We're seeing a lot of previous youth ambassadors becoming part of the IGF ecosystem. The question will be, when it comes to having concrete action points for transmission in the Caribbean, what could a possible process for the innovations to actually be heard, articulated, and put more into policy practicals? How to engage and attract newcomers, parliamentarians from the Caribbean to public policy and net forum. I think those two questions are very much related. And I'd also, if he's available, invite Rodney to join us for responding to this, because the youth focus has been a very important part of our consideration around growing the dialogue concerning the role of public policy in digital transformation. And the question of how to attract the youth and how to give them a legitimate voice is one that there is no single answer for it. At one point, the CTU was actively engaged in organizing and facilitating a Caribbean Youth Forum. And the idea was to take the voices that came to that forum and synthesize their commentary and present it to the decision-making body at the CTU for policy consideration. Over the years, I think it is clear that a more evolved set of approaches are required. And some of the discussions we're having right now is the creation of a youth forum that is a combination of the national IGF type format and what we've been doing at the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum in terms of raising certain issues. How that gets done, how it gets engineered, to me has to be done in collaboration with. And that list includes secondary schools, region-wide, community colleges, region-wide, universities, region-wide, where persons who are aware of the fundamentals of the internet economy and the internet ecosystem and the policy considerations around it can provide that level of input to the youth so that they're aware of the basic structures, but also allow the youth to give their perspectives on how things could change. What is the state of their perception and understanding of the digital landscape and its impact upon their life and their future, in a way that puts them as peer voices in the discussions around the future of the Caribbean internet and the global internet, for that matter. I think it's fundamental that the outreach goes as deep as possible into the society and catching voices as young as possible into the conversations around whither goeth internet governance, so that there is awareness of national concerns, regional concerns, and global concerns. There are trends globally that are impacting at the community level, and those connections need to be, again, thoroughly investigated and interrogated to inform the policymaking process. So
I see.
Sum it up. Mm-hmm.
I see the Secretary General came on camera. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yes, yeah, I invited him. I wanted him to also add because it's been a rolling conversation. So, Rodney?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. So I think from my own experience, the best way to involve young people is to get them to tell you how to engage them. And so even for this year, as you're aware, we are planning the youth IGF, and discussed with Nigel is that I don't want us to plan a youth IGF and invite them or invite young people. I want the young people to be a part of the planning process for that. So I think that's fundamental. We had the same experience in Barbados, hosting the first youth IGF as well. That is important that young people actually plan it for themselves and let them tell us how to engage them. And of course, we've been doing our best to support the participation of young people in Generation Connect, being held in conjunction with the WTDC, which we will speak about a bit later. So we certainly have been trying. We want to, within our stakeholder engagement unit specifically, place an emphasis on young people. We believe that even in engaging with our member states, that it is important that we build what I call youth ambassadors or digital ambassadors, to copy what Barbados has done, using young people in tertiary institutions to help in our digital transformation efforts and going into community centers, and when government launches a service, for them to hold the hand of the community and walk them through the process step by step and help to build digital literacy nationally. So those are some of my thoughts on it, but certainly we need to have young people tell us how to engage them, and we have to find a mechanism, Nigel, in particular, as we plan the youth IGF, that to ensure that it is being planned by young people for young people.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
Back to Bevil, in terms of what was said in your presentation. There's no shortage of talent. We could find ways and means of getting finance and so on. From a cultural point of view, though, do we need to overcome a kind of Caribbean, a bias to foreign? There isn't usually the same ready acceptance of a homegrown solution versus something you hear about coming from abroad. Is that, to what extent you think that's a problem, and what maybe can we do to overcome that?
I think we could overcome it with the truth that there are functional, stable, secure, reliable, effective, efficient Caribbean solutions. That story needs to be told. That story brings confidence that trusting in indigenous talent and indigenous solutions will not lead you to crisis and chaos and drama and frustration.
Actually, let me just interrupt one second, because I saw June Paris add a comment that I said bias. He said not so much bias, fear.
Yeah.
Is it so? Maybe you could put a
yes. So and the fear is, if I take this chance with something local, it will fail. They might go out of business. I'm not sure we could rely on them to grow with us. Any one of a number of things that can be self-fulfilling prophecies or proven wrong. Typically, and we hear this from a number of Caribbean entrepreneurs and innovators. They don't want to invest in us in the same way that they would invest in a foreign firm or consultant or solution. They want us to come in at the low ball price, but they're willing to pay X more for the overseas thing. And when you have those kinds of scenarios, the investment in local talent has to come from, again, from my perspective, a policy position. We've seen developing countries move through similar local content policies toward a robust, or the creation of robust internal marketplaces, because they've insisted on these things need to have local suppliers, or these things need to have local sources, or these things need to have local content. There's room and there's a role for that kind of insistence to change the status quo. As I said earlier, the tides aren't going to carry us there. The fears, the concerns, the bias, they're real. And they're real because there are examples of failed local solutions, but there are also examples of failed foreign solutions. You just don't put the same emphasis on it when you do your Google searches and your international research. So failure is a part of any landscape, but it doesn't mean you don't invest in it. What we're trying to create is something that is sustainable. And I think the pandemic taught some very interesting lessons about the dependence or reliance on foreign solutions, infrastructure consultants, and intellectual property. There is a space and a need for indigenous capacity or local providers to support local digital development. We are closer to home. We understand the needs more intimately and fundamentally, but the investment has to be equivalent and sometimes even more to make up for the gap and to allow small firms that might just start off, for example, two developers with a solution, does not an enterprise solution create? And when you think about the anatomy of digital solutions, it involves more than just software development and hardware technology. You need other skill sets to apply, and those skill sets need to be invested in if the small firms with the big ideas have to become big firms with big solutions. So my response to it is investment required, leadership required, but also the perception of the value of local capacity also required.
Right. I think we got an additional question coming here from Janelle Lake. I appreciate emphasis being placed on getting the youth and young people involved in these conversations. This is without a doubt important, but what of the young at heart? How do interested persons in the Caribbean community who don't fall into the youth category participate in the shaping of internet enabling policy in a meaningful way? I've inquired, and it seems the only avenue available is to attend these forums as an interested listener. Thanks. So I guess
I'll turn that question over to the chair of the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, who is also young at heart, and I'm sure he has a good response. Over to you, Nigel.
Well, I mean, one has to participate, and certainly over the past 2 years, a lot of the fora in which you can participate and make contributions have gone online. So it might be a little easier in that sense. You don't necessarily have to travel and spend money and beg for a fellowship, as the case might be. What I would say is that there is always the opportunity, and especially I have found in my experience in the internet governance space, for individuals and organizations to make meaningful contributions. It's really just a question of you and taking up the opportunity to follow a particular topic, to make up a proposal, participate in a discussion as the case might be. So really it is a question of doing as you're doing because you are attending this forum, you are raising a particular question, and it's basically just taking these opportunities to make your voice heard as Bevil has just recently posted. We are coming into the close to the end. I don't see any more questions right now, but I have one that I can ask you, Bevil, as we close, which is in terms of the cultural change of digital transformation. So we talked about seizing the benefits of the transformation, right, and maybe getting savings and that sort of thing. But a lot of complaints we hear these days about automated customer service and so on. It's impersonal, it's this and it's that. Is there a niche or some sort of differentiation to be found for us to retain some sort of Caribbean character in the way that we implement these digital solutions? Because throughout the world, you implement a solution and they might all seem the same. But if we want to promote the local entrepreneurs and support them and so on, and if we want them to become global titans, or maybe have global reach to the Caribbean diaspora and so on, is there some way we could do this in a way that retains some sort of Caribbean character?
Absolutely. I certainly believe so. I think, and when I speak in terms of Caribbean solutions, to me, it has to have that flavor that defines us. It's difficult to consider solutions without considering service and what constitutes good or excellent service. And in a Caribbean context, is that human dimension. So yes, people want automation of tasks that should not be manual, or greater efficiency in tasks that should not be inefficient. But how that service gets delivered, to me, that's where the creativity of the entrepreneurial mind or the innovative mind comes in. One of the speakers, or at least one of the, or two of the speakers in the roundtable to follow, should be sharing on how, for example, the service desk operates, where you have your automated tickets at one level. But from a Caribbean context, people want that phone call. It's slightly more expensive because automation is supposed to reduce costs and remove the human element. But in a Caribbean context, that creates a connection point that again addresses this issue of the fear of tackling something or taking something locally. It provides a nearness even when the service provider or service provision is not happening within the jurisdiction. We've seen that happening in different sectors, the justice sector being one of them, but also the delivery of government services being another, where the combination of automation and human touch, tactfully, efficiently, strategically delivered, creates a different level of perception of the value or quality of that service being delivered. And so I think there is a role for both. I don't think automation obviously the requirement for human connection. I don't think computerization necessarily means coldness of service delivery if it is designed with the customer or consumer in mind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bevil. I think we'll leave it there at this point. I think that was a start into our public policy forum discussions for today. So let me thank on behalf of all the organizers, Mr. Bevil Wooding, Aaron's Director of Caribbean Affairs, who's also an advisor in strategic ICT at the OECS Commission, for his presentation this morning about investing in transformation. I'll thank the previous speakers as well, and all the contributors, Mr. Rodney Taylor, CTU Secretary General, Kevin Swift of LACNIC, and Mr. Heiner Bowling of Aaron, for their presentations this morning. According to our schedule, we will take a 10-minute break at this point and be back at 10:15 for the first roundtable discussion, and this will be moderated by Mr. Kevin Swift of LACNIC. So do enjoy your coffee break or comfort break, as the case might be. See you back at 10:15. Thank you.